on this particular committee, it's been really important for council to get the full information. And we've been presenting it at these big meetings of council or these big meetings of PFC. And I'm really happy that there's kind of this working group that can grapple with this stuff and focus on it. And it makes tons of sense to have a fresh voice chairing that committee, so I'm very happy about the whole thing.
Do you have something to ask? Can you start with what happened with the 10-year capital development plan on affordable housing?
See, I told you.
There's always one.
Yes, so today was actually a very big day because it's the first time that we have actually created a long-term strategic plan for investment in affordable housing. In the past, it's always been very episodic. So if we got some money from the federal or provincial government, we'd kind of look at our projects and go, that one. It's a lot like the way we used to do transit. And so we moved throughout most of the city to thoughtful long-term strategic plans that allow us to prioritize in advance of having to spend money quickly. And so that's really the beginnings of what we saw today, is a real understanding that regardless of everything we do on the market side of things, we still have a real shortfall in supply of subsidized housing, what we used to call subsidized housing, which really does have to be built by government or nonprofit organizations. And so creating a roadmap of what that looks like allows us to really plug directly into the federal and provincial housing strategies.
And how likely is having a plan to lead towards getting those other levels of government to contribute towards it?
The good news is that after many, many years of federal and provincial governments really abrogating their responsibility to housing, we now have governments in Edmonton and Ottawa who are really saying the right things and committing big amounts of money to developing housing. Now, the checks haven't really started coming yet, and there's big debates between how much of it has to go to life cycle maintenance to make sure every current unit is a decent, safe unit versus how much has to go to building new units. And this roadmap that we got today really helps us make those decisions. So long story short, the province and the feds have committed. Having the plan in place allows us to advocate to get the cash flowing.
With the Olympic Committee, can you explain your comments about why much of the work needs to be done in Canada?
I think what this committee really needs to grapple with is not the big public debates that we have at council and that we have had in the Priorities and Finance Committee. This group needs to give direction on negotiations, on what a deal could look like so that we can bring a deal back to council. And it also needs to really give direction on who gets to be appointed to the bid committee, who the chairs will be, and so on. So that's just a lot of the skunk work, if you like, of keeping the process going.
Because a few more specifics on the timeline. When June comes up, obviously that's a very, very important month for this committee. What do you think is going to be, in your mind, the big role for this committee going forward? Obviously, council, this could potentially go back to where we were supposed in June.
Yeah, so I'm still very hopeful that June will be a point where we will really have a deal in terms of what the numbers look like to be able to present to the public. June's getting close, so I'm wondering if we're going to slip a little bit on that timeline, but I think the next big milestone for council, the next reaffirmation or the next exit ramp, is when there's a deal. So council can actually look at what the deal looks like, what it's going to require of the city, and say whether they're in or not. At that point, if council says, yeah, we're in, let's keep going, the next step, I think, becomes a public hearing and a plebiscite. So it's really a matter of staging these things.
What's the multi-party commitment, the October deadline? Can you articulate what the significance of that one is?
So the next two big deadlines are that the Canadian Olympic Committee has to endorse the bid. And their timeline for doing that is the end of June. Now, for them to endorse the bid, they're going to need to see the deal. So if the deal's not ready yet, that's where I'm worried, well, not worried, where I'm suggesting that things may slip. In October, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, officially invites countries to bid. And so that's another deadline. It's sort of a more formalistic deadline because, of course, if the COC endorses the bid, we'll go through that gate as well. But that's also the time I've been using in my own head, as approximately the right time for a plebiscite.
What do you think of Mr. Fielding's comments? Can this just be a little more fun?
Have some fun.
Is that even possible?
I wouldn't have said it quite like that because I don't believe in having fun. That was just for Darcy. Congratulations, there you go.
No fun zone in the Olympics. Darcy.
On many issues. we have found that this new council, as we have been finding our feet and we have been figuring out how to work best together, has frankly gotten a little humorless about it, and has really focused on small issues and small grievances instead of on big pictures and big dreams. So it may not be about having fun, but it may be about opening our minds to the possibility of what's out there. And maybe it's the wrong thing, maybe it's not going to work, maybe we can't get the money to work. But let's open our minds to be creative, to be imaginative, to dream about what is possible. And I think that's really the feeling was getting at.
This committee was formed in part because of concerns and backlash over the perception that the whole process hadn't really been that transparent. And yet we heard today that a lot of the committee sessions are going to be held in camera, or, as you suggested, in the legal traditions room where there's no live streaming for the public. So how do you try to, I guess, address those concerns of a lack of transparency while still meeting in camera on?
Well, first of all, I don't buy those concerns. I think that that's a narrative that simply isn't true. It's a narrative that has been pushed by critics of the process when, in fact...
But it's also been...
Well, let me finish.
Oh, no, by the fact that...
If you don't mind, you asked a question, let me answer it. We can have a debate later.
It's not a debate, it's pushing back against it.
But this is it, right? These are the critics. That's what they've been saying. They can say that. It's not true. And when you, in fact, look at independent observers, like people who follow bids, they've called it the most transparent and accessible games process they've ever seen.
Who by name said that?
Like look at Inside the Games or GamesBids.com and you see this stuff, right? And in fact, that's part of the issue, right? That's really the issue here, is that we've been so transparent that it has allowed every single misstep and every single backpedal to show up. And I suggested to council that we set up a council committee so that more members of council were engaged in the process, whether it's the public sausage making we've been doing this entire time, or whether it is some of the stuff that, we're not going to discuss who should be appointed to the bid committee in public. That's not fair to the people who have been brave enough to put their names forward. So we got to be realistic about that too.
But how can you dismiss the criticism of transparency or lack of transparency when city administration withheld 2 reports to city commission?
Well, again, that's a helpful narrative, but of course there's
So it's not
5,400 pages of stuff that was released, and certainly there was a public report that said we commissioned these reports, and they exist, and council members knew that. And people who say, oh, they were discovered by the press, well, no, they were in a public report. And the issue here is that there's just a ton of information, and it's difficult to be able to process all of that work. And I think that it's really convenient to fall into that narrative that there's some grand conspiracy theory, but as I've said many, many, many times, give me some credit for knowing how to do my job. If there was a grand conspiracy theory, we wouldn't be here.
So how do you, just to piggyback on the point about the reports, because I think Councillor Farrell mentioned that the reports were commissioned, but there was some funding for the reports. So is that?
No, what she said something that I didn't quite get. She said that there was no funding for full analysis of the reports. The reports are short, right? And let's remember, the thing that we forget, no other bid committee hires critics to poke holes in the analysis. No other bid committee flies in the person who stopped the Boston Olympics to get their perspective. And that's where I say this has actually been unbelievably transparent. That unbelievable transparency really allows for people to pick on things, because otherwise no one would ever have known that even existed. But it was in a public report that it existed, so of course people would have questions about it.
Are there dangers, though, that putting all that out there, though, feeds the public perception that, hey, this is disorganized, and who's in charge, and they're all fighting?
Yeah, I've said that many times, right? We're making all the sausage in public, which means that every misstep gets vastly magnified. Every small error gets put out there, and a lot of people focus on those. And what I'm suggesting is, think about the big picture. And if you're so irritated, if you think, look, all of these little missteps and backsliding means that we can't organize it, that we're not smart enough or good enough to do it, that's fine. That's a totally valid opinion to have. But I would suggest that it's the very transparency that allows all this to be seen. We wouldn't even know about these issues because everything that came to council would be perfectly packaged, perfectly polished, and tied with a vote.